or webinar. I want to get started. I would like to start off with our presentation. You can open it up for us.
Yep, I'm on it.
Thank you. Okay. Renting partnerships whole purpose is to keep housing affordable and allow residents to build equity, renters that is, to build equity. You want to go to, I want to present this video relative to how the housing market is working or not working for affordability. Go down on the screen, there should be a hookup for that. But, oh, there it is. Thank you.
You know, the first sign that you're gonna have to leave your neighborhood is when vintage clothing shops show up. Then the housing value's gonna go up and then they're all gonna get the push.
In the Greater Toronto Area of the last 30 years, housing prices have increased by 425%.
Then we start asking, who's gonna live in cities? Who are cities for?
They want to raise the rent up to like $900 each. If it goes to $3,400, then I have to make at least $100,000 a year.
I've seen the whole area change. They start buying up properties because it's a fantastic investment for them.
When I hear people today saying it's gentrification, one reaction, an ironic reaction, is if only. It's much deeper than that.
Owning the house is only a means to making money.
New owners have taken over. We haven't met them, we haven't seen them, we don't know anything about them. It could be Frosty the Snowman for all I know.
I heard one of the councillors said, if you can't live in Notting Hill, then you shouldn't be in Notting Hill. Who the fuck is he to say something like that?
I can stand in the middle of the street and no traffic coming.
Paradisi fiscali sono il luogo dove capitalismo legale si incontrano.
Gold is not a human right. Housing is. We need to reclaim the fundamental right to housing.
Thank you. What that video was about was the financialization of housing. Housing has become a financial asset. It is used to generate profits because generally a home is the first asset that an individual has. And now that corporations and trusts and other people who see it truly as a source of income, as opposed to a person's right to have a home, has transformed it into an economy, period. Next slide, please. In the 2000s, financial institutions, marketplaces have decided that they wanted the profitability, and it has created unsustainability of affordable housing. During the foreclosures and due to foreclosures and the recession in 2008, the practices that we've been in for the last couple of decades, the wealth of the Black community was wiped out just about halfway anyway, and expanded wealth on an extremely wider wealth gap of 20 to 1 between the black households and white households. And firms are scooping up housing. We had here in Cincinnati, we had one corporation's ownership through various LLCs to had 147 housings that they foreclosed on. So it's that kind of purchase of affordable housing that is creating a problem for us. Next slide. Housing should be a right, an equal right for everyone to be able to have a house, to stay long term, be a part of the upkeep and decisions relative to the housing, and to build wealth and to keep housing affordable. Those are the issues that we're and contribute to the community. Those are the issues that we're dealing with now as a right for people to be able to own the housing. Next slide, please. There are policies that are in place that housing policies that are in place that somewhat stifle the right of to create housing and to keep rents affordable. As we have seen since COVID, the rents have just been astronomical, and people are being displaced out of their housing, and especially affordable housing. Next slide. The housing tax credit has been the main source for a lot of the loss of the truly affordable housing, because that has been the one policy that has created this profitability of housing is the low-income funding, low-income housing tax credits. They get these tax credits to subsidize the construction and rehabilitation of housing developments with strict income limits for the tenants, availability for the tenants. We've seen it goes under the affordability, but it misses a market in between being able to purchase a home and having to be on subsidy. Next slide. Renting partnerships, cooperatives, we address that. We have a strategy that we use in order to address the affordability, the sustainability, and the community building for renters that sometimes cannot have subsidy because they get 50 cents an hour on the dollar, more than what the guidelines say for a person to receive assistance. Next slide. We're a nonprofit, and we look at nonprofit ownership, and that nonprofit, because they're not looking for profit, takes the housing out of the financial market, and the marketplaces where the cost of housing continues to rise. We won't sell it, but we hold it in trust, and that's where the land trust comes in for the benefit of current and future residents. The land, because there is no asset development motive, it creates help to create rights and new opportunities for residents. Next slide, please. The housing rights, perpetual leases, renews annually. We call a perpetuity lease because we don't renew it. It just renews automatically until the decision comes to carry out the legal obligations, 30-day notice, so forth and so on. And the rights embodied in the owner's mission and protected by the lease, a path to wealth and a role in management. Next slide. We adding value. We call this participatory management because the resident makes contributions to upkeep and stabilize the property. It offsets the vacancy factor and the turnover expense and the financial credits, and it results in the renters developing financial credits. Next slide. The credit values that comes through the legal contract is built into the contract as addendums, as being a member of the association, the resident association, participating in the upkeep of the property, and they become vested after 5 years. They can stay there and earn up as much as $10,000 in 10 years. However, in 5 years, they have about a little over $4,100, and the contracts renew annually unless the resident decides that they want to move, and they do just like any other renter. They would give at least a 30-day notice. But if they do it before 5 years, they will not receive the equity. One of the aspect of this is that if the resident, the turnover rate, it's about 2 years to 2.5 years before a person generally moves out. And if they stay 5 years, that is at least 2 turnovers. And that allows us to be able to give them the equity. Next slide. This is our first project. It was in St. Anthony Village in Over the Rhine, which is the neighborhood that is just north of our downtown, which the downtown is just north of the Ohio River. But we developed this affordable housing, and this is our proving ground of the theory that we had relative to that renters can earn equity without any subsidy by their participation in management, and the savings in the budget offsets the cost of funding for the credits. The rights of residents are not protected by the legal structure. And what we mean by that is that I don't understand that, excuse me, because I'm reading it and I'm not seeing what I thought it said. But anyway, the legal rights are protected really by the lease, in that everything that we say or do, it is a part of the lease. There are amendments or addendums to the lease, and through the renter equity agreement and the member association agreement. Next slide. This is our more recent project is on the left, but that's what it looked like. This the first one that looks with the awnings on it was our first project after we left Cornerstone, because we were at Cornerstone when we had the initial development, and created renting partnerships. And We went to a smaller version because we have neighborhoods that have an abundance of 2 to 4 family units that have been affordable for long periods of time and then are becoming non-affordable now because of the financialization of housing and assets. Next slide. It's a picture of both properties now. This is what they look like. And they're both 2-family units. The one on the right was our initial one. And we acquired it in 2015, I believe, 15 or 16. And we raised the rent for the first time in 2021. And that was based upon the expenses of the property going up. We don't just raise arbitrarily. Next slide. This is a recent purchase. We just purchased that this property on maybe about 3 or 4 months ago at the end of 2022. And we're just beginning to get the development on that. We recently got a loan from the cooperative bank to purchase this house. This is a 2-family with 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom unit on the 2nd and 3rd floor. Next slide. I wanted to sort of give you the fact that while there is a way for people to have affordable housing that is sustainable, that will not really interrupt their living if they're satisfied, and what the benefits are to the or the impacts are for the resident. If you go to our website and look at the study that was done by Ohio Housing Finance Agency to prove the theory that we had relative to the operations and the management of the financial operations and the management of the property. It deemed that we did prove our theory, but there was a value added in that it said it really created community. That was the residents' initial response relative to them being involved in the renter equity participatory management system. That still proves to be true, that people began to build a community because we have monthly meetings as residents. That's a part of the whole participatory management. They have to commit to stay 5 years, pay their rent on time, do a work assignment, which is usually keeping the common areas, helping to keep the common areas clean and maintained, and attending the monthly meetings that we have as a community. It benefits the resident in many ways because a lot of the renters have been renters for quite some time and do not know how to take care of the yard or maintain their property, and they get that information by working and being participants in the management. We go over the budget, and they get to understand why the budget and how it affects your rent, how it goes up and down relative to that. And it's an education for some people who have not really learn how to budget. It also builds the community by building trust because we're meeting every month and we're becoming knowing each other and going through and setting policies that we all begin to live by. So there are other impacts that have helped. Oh, over the years, I've seen the residents use the equity in just like a homeowner would when they get in financial trouble. We've had a person who had to have eye surgery. She was a paralegal, and she could no longer read like she used to, so she had to have eye surgery. She used it as her copay. A mother whose daughter was going away to college, she did her dorm room and got it together, all of the things that you know you have to send a kid off to college with. Another mother who was working, her car wasn't working. She was able to take her money and as a down payment on a more reliable vehicle. We had 5 people to take their equity out at 5 years and buy a home because that was their decision. As you can see, there are, oh, one other thing. We had a young man who was living there. He and his mother and his brother were in the complex, and he lost his job. And he took his equity out and he went and he moved to California with a new job. So it affords a person the ability to have resources when they have a financial situation. So now I'm opening for comments and questions.
How much do the residents earn in a month? And who keeps those?
We have a sort of like a mortgage document where we used it at, I think it was 10% interest, 7% interest for 10 years on a $10,000 loan, and we use it so they earn a different amount. When they first start off, the first payment is like 57. By the time they get to 4 years, they're like at 78 or 81, somewhere along in there, dollars. And it's not a steady thing. It's like an amortized. They own so many over a period of time.
And then where does that money come from?
It comes from the turnover that you would have to spend if they moved out. And from the other janitorial stuff that they do in terms of that. Those are all line items in the budget, basically. But the residents do, you pay for a janitor or someone to do the janitorial type items. The resident, like cutting the grass, cleaning the hallways. Oh, it was interesting too. When we first started in our first project, we had inside and outside work, whereas that we would come together as a community and do the planning for the in the spring and spring cleaning up the community room and planting flowers for the summer. And when we first started, I'm not an outdoor person, but Margie is, and everyone was inside with me cleaning cabinets and hallways and windows in the community room and what have you. In about 4 or 5 years, I found myself very much alone. They were all outside with Margie doing the planting the flowers and cleaning the yard and getting things ready for the summer. So yes, it's those kind of activities that they do where we would have to pay someone else to do. They're doing it.
Hey, Carol, we got some questions on Zoom.
Use the microphone, Jerry.
Oh, thank you. Okay, and this question comes from Richard. Richard asked, is a portion of their rent contribution set aside in renter equity accounts? If yes, how much? Maybe dollar amounts, percentage of monthly rent? And also, is there a multifamily project that has done this when obtaining LIHTC equity financing?
Yes, our initial one was a LIHTC property. The equity is not taken from their rent. Well, it is because the rent is the budget. So we have which was really my job, was to do the inspections weekly to make sure that they are doing their task and earning their equity. And I make a log of that, and that is taken out of the budget and set aside as a reserve for each person on the rent, on their equity. They don't earn equity if they don't pay their rent on time. They don't earn equity if they're not at the monthly meeting. They don't earn equity if they don't do their assignment. And if they don't attend the meeting. So those are the ways that they earn the equity. If they don't do either one, and if they don't earn it for that month, they'll earn it at the level the amortized level that they stopped and missed it before they start at that point. So everyone doesn't earn the whole amount because life happens. Kids have things at school, the parents got to go, so they're not there. Sickness occurs, they're not there. So they don't earn equity that particular month.
We had a question. What was the dollar amount?
What was the dollar?
Could we have it asked again?
I was just wondering what was the dollar amount or the percentage rate of the equity that's put in for each person, each tenant?
Carol, did you hear
If
that?
someone could repeat what she said, I didn't hear everything. It was going in and out.
Yeah, she asked what was the dollar amount? How do you determine how much equity each tenant gets?
Each tenant gets the same amount because we have an amortization schedule, basically, that says what the earnings is per month, not per person. Everybody earns that. Everybody starts at that $50 and some 70 something cent. It's amortization. And as you know, amortizations they put so much interest in doing one time, and then after so many years, the interest decreases and you're basically paying principal. It's the same philosophy there.
We had another question on Zoom. This one comes from Sam. Sam asks, do co-op programs help connect residents to other supportive services to help them become more independent and financially stable?
Well, we know the resources if they have a need that applies to something other than what we can do, because everyone, life happens and people need assistance beyond what they can provide or come into contact themselves. So we do work with the different social agencies that are in our city that will help a person. We will lead them in that direction. However, I think that one of the things that we do that a lot of rental properties don't do is that we involve them in every aspect of management, which brings about an education in itself by going over the monthly budget, understanding why we have to raise rent. It's if we don't. I mean, if we don't educate, they know that. They learn about gardening and taking care of property. They learn about each other and begin to support each other and build a community. So those are some of the rewards that come out of the participatory management. One of the things that we do is that we have orientation. They select themselves to be a part of this. They have to attend three monthly, 3 orientation meetings before they can even rent. The orientation number 1 is just an introduction to let them know what is expected. Orientation 2 tells them the difference between owning a home and renting, and the costs renting through rental equity, and how it is a financial benefit. And then the third and sometimes fourth, depending on how much we get through with the lease and everything. But we go over the lease, go over the membership agreement, and go over the renter equity agreement. And based on that, then they make a commitment as whether or not they want to continue. When we left Cornerstone and started renting partnerships, we had a 3-year waiting list. People had been on the list for 3 years, coming in and out of meetings, attending, and because we said the one who attends the most meetings is the person who would have the next vacant apartment. So it was, they made the commitment that they felt like they could do the obligation. We did have a couple of people that left because they did violate their lease. However, we did not have to take them to court. They understood what was going on. And in 10 years of, and it was really 11 years, because in the 11th year, we had our first and only sit out. And by that time, we had 64 units that we were dealing with.
Carol, the question was, what's the sit out?
Was
What's
one we only when we have to actually physically sit someone out on the street through the courts, having gone through the courts.
Okay, Miss Carol, we really appreciated your time, and I just think this is a really inspiring story. Thanks for joining us. I have so many.
Thank you for having us.
But please, if you don't mind, maybe put your contact info or a way for people to learn more in the chat, because I think we'll have to stay connected.
And Carol.
All right then. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
On our was 6 days. So she's kind of pinch hitting at the last minute, so.
Great work, too. Okay. All right, so we're gonna take like a 15-second stand up and stretch break, everybody, if you are able and want to, and that includes people on Zoom. So we're gonna just take a deep breath and stretch up. And then breathe out. Gonna do 2 more. Breathe in. Breathe out. And 1 more. Breathe in. And breathe out. All right, thanks, y'all. So I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet so we can get back on schedule. My name's Alvin, and I'm with Kheprw Institute, originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, and have been with Kheprw for about 11 years now. Kheprw has been around since 2003, a community empowerment organization focused on building community wealth. And I just want to reiterate some of the things were shared earlier, just about the importance, particularly by Brian, about the importance of relationships. I would just say things like cooperatives are a form in which we can turn those relationships into ways of life, or to provide important things that we need in life. But I think it can go either way. You can use cooperatives to build and strengthen relationships, and you can build relationships that then turn into cooperative enterprises and projects. And then they're just, whether it's a cooperative or a community land trust or a nonprofit or community organization, those are just ways of turning the people's relationships into institutions that transcend any individual person, that help to create a kind of culture that transcends time and really passes it on to the next generation. So we're going to start with just a quick short video that is a little bit about the Kheprw story and some of those same values about what we mean when we talk about community wealth building. It's about 4 minutes.
Community means something different round here. Love's breeding ground born new, blossoming into barraging stories of blackness, banter, and bustle through blues like blood couldn't make us any closer. This be communion.
Growing community is like growing food. It's a lot of work. You got to till the soil. You got to plant the seeds. You got to have the right weather conditions. So community is just like that. You start with what you have where you are.
Kheprw is a nonprofit grassroots organization that was created roughly about 20 years ago. And when it was created by my father, my mother, and my godmother. They're the 3 co-founders. And they created it to help me, Miss Paulette's grandson, my lifelong, he's like a brother, Ijaz. Some of my partners I grew up with, Jerome and Jerome, in my neighborhood. It's basically like, hey, how do we create a formal experience for these young black men to grow, thrive?
The birth of Kheprw is about, again, inherently, the crux of Kheprw is tied to liberation and freedom. Freedom to me is having a goal or goals, aspirations, dreams, visions, and missions, and being able to have the opportunity to fulfill those goals, aspirations, visions, and missions.
Empowerment means to me like you get something right. You do what you want to do. You figure out what's your goal and you set your goal.
Running to get it like I'm in the Olympics, but there is no finish. We gotta keep going, so I set the pace. Handle with grace, the person I need to be leading the race. Ballin' like I never balled before. Flexing forever like 24. Taking the keys, open all the doors. Linings to cover up all the sores. Give it your best and the world adores. This is for certain, I'm so for sure.
We live in a culture, when you think of wealth, you think of money. How much money you got? What's your credit rating? Do you have any intergenerational wealth? Do you own a home ownership, blah, 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 blah. If you're not careful when you think community wealth, then the folks start thinking, oh, you're talking about how rich your community is, how much fiscal assets does it have. But wealth itself really is much broader than that. It's your intellectual wealth. You know, what kind of information do you know? Others in your community, what do they know? Breadth and depth of your relationship with others in your community. Spiritual wealth, faith, your heart, music, art, you know, those things all make up wealth in your community.
It's community gardening. The Entrepreneur Center, we're renovating and building at 38th and Illinois, the 17 acres that we bought on the south side of farmland. But really all those projects are really one thing, which is the development of relationships, the development of people with a strong emphasis on young leaders, but highly intergenerational. That really those relationships are the building block to creating anything, whether it's a garden or a community land trust, a cooperative, et cetera. So next I'm going to show just a short video, about 10 minutes, that explains what a community land trust is. So Kheprw, along with partners from around the city that have been a part of the Homes for All Coalition, some people in the room today have been involved in starting a community land trust for Indianapolis. And again, like Brian said, it's a lot of work and it takes time to build those relationships and trust. And even it takes time sometimes for the opportunity to come out of the ground, for the time to be right for something to happen. So we'll go ahead and play that real quick and then we'll pretty much open it for any questions people have.
I was a single mother with 3 children at that time. I just gotten divorced. And I was working 2 jobs and trying to go to school and take care of my kids. And the more money I make, the more they ask for. And I remember there were times when I had maybe $15 left over to carry me on to 2 weeks. And I was getting very frustrated with the system of, you know, trying to have a decent place to live. For me, the future was quite bleak. I just couldn't help but think, what I'm going to do this all my life. I can't get ahead this way. I almost felt like, well, maybe I should just quit, go on public assistance, and let them take care of me. Buying a house was never a dream of mine. I never thought that I could ever afford it. But I was sitting in my office one day, and I was going through the newspaper, and I saw an ad in the paper saying that if you want to own a home, here's an opportunity, no money down. I'm like, right, yeah, right. But I felt like, let me take a chance. I'm gonna call. I met the executive director, and I said, well, do you have any vacant houses right now? And she said, yes. And she brought me over to Exum Street, and the house was just in repair. But I loved it. I'm a country girl. I love the old houses. I love the front porch. I went inside and it had the high ceilings, and I was like, this is it. This is my house.
The organization Linda called was the Durham Community Land Trustees, based in the West End neighborhood in Durham, North Carolina, next to the upscale neighborhood surrounding Duke University. The Durham Land Trust, like many others around the country, was started to improve and preserve the deteriorating local housing stock that had been abandoned by absentee property owners.
If you drive through Durham, you'll see there's a lot of houses that are boarded up. And that's because absentee landlords can come in. They know that there are a lot of low to moderate income people that need housing. A lot of substandard houses, they used to be called liquor houses, if you want to put it. Actually, 4 walls, windows, no heat. And people used to come and stay for a little while. The landlords didn't do anything. They never complained. A lot of people don't know that they have a voice to say, I don't deserve to live this way. They can't afford anything better, so that landlords don't have any pressure behind them to fix it up.
During the era of about 1950, the elder people started dying out. And then that's when the landlords started moving into this area. Little by little, they took the houses over. And little by little, the younger generation sold the houses and moved out this area, moved north. And little by little, the landlord took the land for little or nothing. What we want now is to make this a more family-type community like we have always had. The Land Trust got in here and they did a beautiful job. Somehow or other, they gave the people what they wanted, that was housing.
This is a typical Durham Community Land Trustee rehab. We've gutted it with volunteer efforts. We will take this house, and where there's tongue and groove hole, it'll be all new sheetrock, all new walls, new windows, new doors, fully insulated from the attic to the floors, actually blown into the walls. Everything will be new in terms of new fixtures, new kitchen, new doors. This will be back to regular height, and then the addition will be put back on the end. And after the resident selection process, we'll have a new resident move in for a home ownership opportunity.
I rang the doorbell so I can hear how it sounds. Listen, listen. Wow. The house is great. Look at it. This is the living room. This is the kitchen. Look, this is what I do. Here's the bathroom. And this is my room. Is that where you say you want to be? Yeah. Okay. My old house was falling apart, and my grandma decided to move to a new house. And nobody even want to live there.
Come on up, pick up on it.
The Land Trust started work on this street and was invited in by the community with a community march that was organized to board up this house because there were drugs and other illegal activities occurring here that they wanted to restrict, which has been real typical on this street with any of the vacant houses. Since then, we have done 5 rehabs, and over time, it's really become a much more stable street. And this is typical on all the streets that we target. If we're able to get 3, 4, 5 houses rehabbed, tends to stabilize with the home ownership.
Since the Land Trust has come into this community, things have changed tremendously. We're talking about quality, affordable homes. This is a quality house. Central air, central heat, thermal windows, energy efficient. The Land Trust prides themselves on having quality, not substandards. And the surrounding community has taken note to that.
Land trusts reduce the cost of acquiring and renovating their properties and the initial purchase price to homeowners with government subsidies and private donations, including contributions of volunteer labor.
I asked them at that time was how much money do I need? About $1,500 to get in the house, to own it. And they were like, yes. They sat down with me and explained to me that I would be purchasing my home, but they would have to retain the ownership of the land. At that particular time, I wanted the house, and when I asked them why did they maintain ownership of the land, they explained to me that the reason they do that is to guarantee lifelong affordability. That should I ever decide to leave this home and move to the traditional market, that they would give this house back to someone who was in the same circumstances I would. I don't own the land, but I have full rights to the land. You know, and the one point I keep telling people, this is not a step, you're not fixed here forever. Should I move on in life, I will leave this house to my children. It will always be affordable to them.
You would have the same rights to that land as any other homeowner would. The only difference is that the land trust reserves the first right. If you decided to sell that house, the land trust would have the first right to purchase that house back from you, or we would help you find another low or moderate income person to purchase that house. And the idea behind that is to keep that housing stock permanently affordable. So that way investors or absentee landlords couldn't come in, buy that property and inflate the cost of rent so that low and moderate income people, you know, would not be able to afford it. If you want to sell your house, there's a resale formula. This formula would give you back what you had invested in the house, plus an inflation factor. But you would not be able to go out and sell that house on the open market at an inflated value.
I know that I didn't buy this house to make a profit. I made it to get ahead. I always wanted to give that another person the same opportunity that I did. This is not the traditional market. You have to understand that principle before you buy a land trust house. All right, man, you want to set the table for me? You or your children must live in the property at least 6 months out of the year. I can't decide, well, I want to move to California for 6 months, so I want to sublease it to somebody. That's also part of the ground lease. You cannot do that. Land trust has built-in safety measures, too. It's meant to protect those who really need it, not those who are trying to get over on the system.
It's very different from just owning land and a piece of property that's all yours. This is ours, but it's also the community's. And so, I mean, we're not in this by ourselves, and we never will be. And if we keep the house and pass it on to our descendants, they won't be in it by themselves either. They will sort of inherit our connection with the neighborhood and with the other land trust houses.
Okay, we're going to stop it there so that we can get some questions on the board. I guess we'll open it up for, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. And I'll just say for a second, if you want more information about Kheprw, I'll give you a second to write it down. It's kheprw.org. That's KHEPRW.org. KHEPRW.org. And if you want more information about, and we're putting it in the chat too, if you want more information about the community land trust that we're organizing here in Indianapolis, it's clt.kheprw.org. And there's a bunch of stuff on there that also is more about community land trust videos and educational materials. So I'll open up. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Go for it, Nate.
I don't know how familiar you are with the history of
that
land trust, but how did they gain access to the land there?
I don't know, but some people, so a lot of community land trusts, they will, similar to community development corporations, they will work with the local land bank, they'll work with city to get access to properties, they'll buy properties or lots or houses on the market, and use like funding, like home funds and CDBG and typical stuff that's used for affordable housing to be able to build units of housing. And I'll just say CLTs aren't just single family homes. Some of them do that, but they also do multifamily, they'll do rental. There's some that do also commercial, also for growing food and farmland, as well as for cooperatives. So there are some CLTs that work specifically to start cooperatives as well.
Can you talk about, well, we got a couple questions in chat, but one I think you can answer pretty quickly is from Sam. Is there a land trust operating in Indy right now?
So we are no, not right now. It has been in formation for the last couple of years. We're currently working with Grounded Solutions, which is the national network that has over 300 community land trusts from around the country that they work with. They also do technical support. So they're our technical support consultant. We also got funding as of last year, $1.5 million from the city of Indianapolis to support the startup for the first couple of years, as well as some other grant funding from the African American Quality of Life Initiative to do both the operations as well as do the first few projects. So that should be ready to go sometime by the end, like mid to late 2023.
There's another question on Zoom here from Wahid. Good to see Wahid. Are land trusts protected from eminent domain?
I don't think anyone is protected from eminent domain. But there is an interesting story about eminent domain. There's a land trust, one of the longest running ones, Dudley Street Neighbors in Boston, that was given the power of eminent domain for a small section of the neighborhood to take back control of the land and housing there. So usually eminent domain is, and again, just for a definition, is used by cities and state and government in order to force property owners to sell their property in order to do things like interstates or other public projects. But generally it's, I don't know if there's anybody that's any into that.
Well, I hate to do this, but we're gonna try to catch up a little bit with our time. So thank you so much, Alvin.
Yeah, and then get at me later. I'll be here for those in the room, and people on the Zoom, you can put your questions in the chat and I'll try and answer them during the event.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Jarrell Duffy from the National Co-op Bank, and he is going to share a little bit of information about financing housing cooperatives. So,
hey, thank you. I'm trying to start my video, but it says that I can't start it. So I don't know if anyone can help me with that. And can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Should I present the slide deck or will someone drive that for me?
If you, it's whatever is easiest for you. If you can share your screen, then
would you mind driving the slide deck? And that'd be great. And if someone can unlock my my video, I'd be able to start that.
your video might
Sure.
be something with your webcam.
I got it. I think you guys can see me now. At least it's showing on my screen. So first, let me just say as a general comment that I've been really excited about a lot of the things that have been presented so far today, and this has been a great conference. I hope the rest of the folks in the room feel the same way as I do, but especially that first panel, the first discussion that really kick-started some of the LIHTC stuff and some of the financing stuff. I thought that was really interesting. And, LIHTC has always been difficult in this co-op space. CSI seems to have cracked the code when it comes to elderly, affordable, cooperative financing. It's good to see others doing that as well. And I certainly would love to connect with you guys to hear a little bit more about what you are doing and how you've been able to do it in that space. So my name is Jarrell Duffy. I am a lender with National Cooperative Bank. If you can start the next slide, please. And just a little bit of background on the bank itself. We were federally chartered under the Carter administration to support cooperatives nationwide. We've been private ever since Reagan. So we're a unique bank. We're headquartered in Arlington, Virginia, with offices in New York and California. Because of the federal charter, we are a mission-centered bank to support cooperatives. As a result, this is a business that we've developed expertise in since 1978, and it's not something we would ever exit. The bank itself is a cooperative. We are customer owned, and our customer shareholders are typically cooperatives. As we do well, our customers also do well. We finance cooperative businesses and real estate, and the conversation today will focus exclusively on real estate finance. We finance a lot of preservation deals. These are existing cooperatives that need repairs that reserves aren't sufficient to finance. We also finance conversions to existing multifamily existing multifamily buildings to cooperatives. As was discussed in the first panel, There's a great policy in DC called TOPA, which is the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And that gives the renters the right to purchase their own building if it's been sold to a third party. This allows them to convert the apartment to condo or cooperatives, and it's been a very powerful tool in DC. It needs to be financed more and needs more funding, but it's definitely a powerful tool. We have also financed construction of new cooperatives. And it's my intent today to try to get to all three. I know we're short on time, so I'll try to speed this up as best as I can. As a bank, we offer bank debt, agency debt, CMBS debt, but we don't do HUD. But we could refer you to some excellent HUD lenders who understand cooperatives. Centennial Mortgage is something that comes immediately to mind. Lending is always more of an art than science. No matter what type of loan you're looking at or what you're trying to choose, there's always some level of trade-offs. Bank debt is always going to typically be less restrictive. Could be more expensive. Agency will add more restrictions, agency being Fannie Mae type loans, but they'll typically be cheaper. HUD will even add more restrictions. HUD typically takes a lot longer to close. And they'll have some fees associated with them, but they are cheaper and it's definitely for a longer term. So navigating the trade-offs can be tricky. With HUD, there typically isn't repricing midway through. But with a 10-year banknote or a Fannie Mae loan, it gives you an opportunity to resize, reprice, add in some additional capital improvement needs that may become apparent later. So one of the benefits of working with us, with NCB, is we've seen different types of transactions all over the country. We have the capability to tailor make a solution for your needs, depending on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Next slide, please. So the objective here is really to provide a high-level review. I know in the room and online there's a wide disparity of knowledge or what we're trying to accomplish here at the conference. So this may be a little bit more middle of the road. If there's a term that I'm using that you don't know, please don't hesitate to ask. If you have a project that you are looking for financing or have some more specific deal questions, please feel free to reach out to me and we can discuss that more in depth offline. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation, so you'll have that information if you want to reach out directly. So the order of the agenda for this presentation is really just to do a quick overview of cooperatives, go into a little bit more about the financing of existing cooperatives, and then lastly on construction loans for new development. That slide is going to look very familiar. So our former NCB put together a slide deck on sort of the capital stack, and we'll get into that later. But it looks very similar to the slide deck we saw in the first session. Next slide, please. So again, I'll go over this quickly. I think we've talked about this, but some basic tenets of cooperatives. The building is owned by a corporation. The residents of the buildings are owner shareholders of the corporation. The tenant shareholders the tenant shareholder has a right to occupy the unit in the building, and it's governed by a proprietary lease, and that gives tenants leasehold rights. This structure allows tenants to own and operate their real estate at cost. If owned by a third party, there's a profit motive that has to be financed, and that's sort of eliminated in the structure. Next slide, please. The biggest benefit of cooperative ownership is democratic control, enabling tenants to have a say on how their building is run. The cooperative approves who comes into the building, either through sale or subleasing. Limited equity cooperatives can enact resale limitations, some through a hard cap, some through a sort of percentage increase, either tied through inflation or some other mechanism. Next slide, please. So there are two types of mortgages, and we do both here at NCB. We'll be talking about one today. A blanket mortgage is essentially the mortgage on the entire building. The borrower would be the corporation, basically the co-op itself. And then there are shareholder loans, which is secured by the co-op shares in a proprietary lease, and that borrower is the actual shareholder. Next slide. So this goes into some of the specifics in terms of what we're looking for in terms of financing, goes into a little bit of our lending box. We like to see owner occupancy. Reason for that is, if it's investors, there's more investors, or if there's more subleasing, if more than half of the building is not owner occupied, then we're really talking about a different type of building. We're not really talking about a building that's sort of cooperatively owned, and it has a different risk profile than a cooperative itself. So that's why we have these limitations here. FNMA stands for Fannie Mae. And so sponsor investor units not to exceed 10% in the Fannie transaction. Commercial spaces, we like to limit that not to exceed 20% of the space or by income. The delinquencies, reserves, and insurance, you're going to see a little bit more on that in these slide decks. The box on this is typically, so for delinquencies, if shareholders are late on their payment for co-op fees, and by the way, maintenance charges, carrying charges, co-op fees, they all mean the same thing. It's all sort of interchangeable. So if you hear me say co-op fees or carrying charges, that basically mean maintenance fees. And those are basically just the fees that the tenant shareholder has to pay for the co-op to maintain the building and fund reserves. So for delinquencies, for folks who are late on payment, we like to see that to be under 5% of the annual maintenance charges that are collected by the cooperative. So if it's more than that will have us start asking questions, and to us that's a sign of some potential weakness within the cooperative, and so it starts having us ask questions. 10% of units as well is another measure of how we look at delinquencies. For reserves, sort of cash on hand, cash in the bank, we prefer to see that at least at 10% of the annual maintenance charges collected by the cooperative. If it's less than that, again, we would want to ask questions or find a way to help the cooperative increase reserves through loan proceeds. Next slide, please. So this helps to, again, crystallize some of our discussion between a blanket mortgage and a share loan. A blanket mortgage, again, is the loan that's borrowed by the cooperative entity, the corporation itself, and is secured by the property. And so all the things we were talking about in the previous slide with the delinquencies and the reserves, all of that's going to pertain to what we look for in our lending box for a blanket mortgage. That's not per se how we're looking at it for share loans. Next slide, please. So this slide speaks to why cooperatives might come to the bank for financing. Maybe a TOPA transaction, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. They may want to refinance their existing mortgage, or their existing mortgage is coming due and they need a new mortgage. So there may be, historically they may have been looking for a cheaper rate. It's not so much what's happening in the market today. But more likely they're looking to finance repairs, capital improvements. Next slide. So this is really going to gear, again, this is towards existing cooperatives. If you're in existing cooperatives, the bylaws for the cooperative would dictate who has the authority to borrow and execute documents on behalf of the cooperative. Financing and getting quotes on capital improvement projects can be a complicated process. So the cooperative should empower an individual or a committee to do this work. After reviewing the options, the board must commit to a course of action. As a means to assess the maintenance and capital CapEx needs, a reserve study is a good place to start. It's recommended that this gets done. A reserve study is when an engineer is engaged by the cooperative to assess the repair needs of the cooperative over the next, say, 10 to 20 years, and how much it will cost to address those needs. And then we'll look at the current reserve balances and how much is being collected over time, and we'll make a suggestion as to whether to increase reserves or maintain them at existing levels. So highly recommended to get that done. to re-engage them periodically. Next slide, please. So typically we'll look at the underlying first mortgage will be the first deed of trust, will be in first position. And they're typically fixed for a period of either 10 to 30 years. There's also lines of credit that we can look at as well. Those are typically in second position, and those are typically adjustable rate type of facilities. Next slide, please. So on this, I wanted to just briefly discuss term versus amortization of a loan. And a typical residential mortgage, it's a 30-year mortgage and it's self-amortizing, meaning that the payments are spread over 30 years and that rate is fixed over 30 years. And this is different from a balloon where the term is, different from the amortization. So, if you have a 30-year, $100,000 mortgage, but after 5 years, the remaining balance is due, and say that's maybe $85,000. That 5-year period is the balloon period, and then you either have to get a new loan to finance the remaining $85,000 that's due, or you can just pay it off through proceeds. Typically, what happens is, after 5 or 10 years, you'll refinance it. You may even get more proceeds to fix new capital improvement needs that may be self-evident in the property. Next slide. So for us, when we talk about amortization, again, that's the period of time that the payments are spread out over. We can amortize up to 40 years, depending upon the needs of the cooperative. Now, 40-year amortization might not be the best thing for the cooperative. It depends on what your objectives are. Typically, I've seen cooperatives try to self-amortize over 15 years. With the idea of, we have a specific project in mind. We don't want to spread this out to future tenant shareholders. So let's do it with our current existing tenant base, pay it off fully in 10 and 15 years, and have the property, have the cooperative debt free. I've seen that a lot. And I have seen some where, the cooperative just is not in a position to self-amortize. And so you need that extra amortization period. And so some of it is front loaded with the current tenant share base, and then others will be amortized over, over the potential new tenant shareholders that come in later. LTV stands for loan to value. It is the balance of the loan versus the appraised value. And there are typically 2 appraised values that are done on these. One is as a co-op value, and one is as a hypothetical rental value. Now, for a co-op, that just means that really applies to market rate co-ops. It's basically the price that is paid in market for those co-op units, and that generates a value for the entire building. As a hypothetical rental, it's as it sounds. It looks at the building as if it were an apartment building, and it generates a value based off of that. We want to be typically less than 50% on a loan to value basis on that. Next slide. So again, this slide, and I guess we'll make this available to you. Please consider this as a reference deck. The next 2 slides are going to crystallize some of the things that we talked about in terms of loan to value, in terms of delinquencies, and what we like to look at. Next slide, please. This slide here talks about the reserves, which we discussed, and also what we haven't discussed, the debt service coverage ratio. We'd like to make sure that we're looking at recurring cash flow from the cooperative, which is basically your co-op fees less your expenses. And that has to be equal to or greater than the annual payment for the loan. And if it's less than that, then the co-op will need to increase the maintenance charges in order to be able to service the debt. And that's one of the reasons why you don't see this in a typical multifamily type of structure. If it's a typical multifamily, not a cooperative, the debt service requirement would be much higher than this. The reason why we do this for a cooperative is because the goal of the cooperative is to own the real estate at cost and to take advantage of the of scale, right? And so because it's at cost, we feel comfortable with having a debt service coverage ratio basically on par with the annual debt service. But if it's, if there are more, if there are less owner occupants, if it's more owned by investors than true, cooperators or people who are tenant shareholders, then this wouldn't apply. Next slide, please. This slide deck, I actually have a full presentation on financing renovations. This is basically just a quick summation of different things that we will look for to make sure you have a construction budget and share that with us, with the bank, and know how much you're going to try to pay for it with loans versus reserves. And just know your bylaws, know who has the authority to sign documents on behalf of the cooperative, and make sure you have a plan to finance all major repair items, critical repair items. Now for us, we try to make this as simple as possible for the cooperative. So we will rate lock on day one when it's funded. We would typically advance into a controlled escrow the funds for the renovations. So this has two effects. One, it increases the restricted reserves for the cooperative, and then number two, it gives you a way to know what your interest cost is going to look like over that 10-year term or 15-year term, or however we structure the loan for the cooperative. So that gives you an easier way to budget and plan out your financing or your future budgets. Next slide, please. So for the underwriting process, this is basically from term sheet to close. When we go through this process, we'll first talk with a loan officer like myself. We'll go through the financials and everything that you provide for us, ask you questions about what you're trying to accomplish and your goals. We'll try to uniquely tailor the solution to the cooperative itself. And then we'll provide you with basically a term sheet based off of those discussions. Take that back to the board to get it fully approved, signed with an application to the loan officer. Next slide, please. This is basically just a rundown list, a checklist items of different things we would need for underwriting the loan. And again, this is for an existing deal. Audited financial statements, they could be reviewed or even company prepared depending on the size of the loan. And then obviously your budget and year-to-date financials. I won't go through all that because you can see that on the slide, but next slide, please. The typical process for this will take about 45 days, 45 to 60 days. Once we get the term sheet back and we start underwriting, from underwriting to close, it'll take about 45 to 60 days. Next slide, please. So once we go through underwriting, then there's a commitment letter so that commitment letter basically summarizes what the loan documents will look like, what the legal documents will look like. And then we'll proceed to closing. You can lock the rate, sort of at this point. So I know that there's a lot of rate sensitive folks out there with what's happening in market with the interest rates and the banking climate right now. And so for us, we can do a 30-day, 60-day lock after it's been approved in underwriting. So while we're working towards getting loan documents prepared and ready, you don't have to worry about where the rate's going to look, where the rate's going to be while we're trying to get the loan documents together. So that gives you the ability to lock the rate in once we get the commitment letter back. Next slide, please. So again, this is another summation of some of the things of key items in our box. We talked about the debt service coverage ratio requirements, the cash reserve requirements, the delinquency requirements, and there's another deck that goes into a little bit more depth, but these are the post-closing, these are the key items that as a bank, we will continue to look for on an annual basis. So we'll continually get some operating statements from you as a cooperative. And we want to make sure that all these items are in line with how we underwrote the deal from the beginning. Next slide. All right, so this is going to get into this is the part of the presentation that looks very similar, but I'm going to tailor this conversation a little bit to basically what does it look like when you're trying to construct a cooperative or do a brand new sort of a ground up build on a cooperative or even a TOPA conversion. What does that look like from construction to permanent? So everything we've talked about so far has been for existing cooperatives, permanent loans. What does it look like when you're converting it from a construction loan to a permanent loan? But before I do that, I guess I can, can we pause here for any questions from the group? I just want to do a quick level set just to, before I go into this part of the presentation, if there are any questions on what was just presented. Okay, I'm not hearing any questions.
I think we got one. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
This is really about qualifying for the loan. Let's say there were delinquencies or sublets or something like that were too high. That would you just say no, or would there be some kind of period where that could be corrected?
No, it wouldn't be a blanket no. It would depend upon the situation. So I've seen situations where the numbers are high. The numbers are high because of one or two individuals where their delinquencies are really sort of skewing things in the wrong direction. And there's a legal process in place or a legal process that's being worked out. So that's a different situation. But if it's because 20% of the if it's because 20% of the tenants are late in their payments, that might be a different situation. We have to get to the bottom of why that is before we can proceed. I think to answer your question, it's a conversation. And depending on how that conversation goes, it may end up being a no. But it's not a straight no right after you trip this. It's more of a conversation and kind of get to the story and the reasons behind it, and if we can get comfortable. Are there any questions in chat? And did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And there are some questions in the chat. How long did you want to do questions for?
We really don't have time for a couple.
Okay, let me do one or two questions, and then I want to get into this capital stack conversation.
Okay. Then let's start out with, we got a question from Sam. How does this fit with earlier discussion of being able to finance 98% of the cost of the co-op?
Yep, and I'm going to get into that into the next slide deck. But 98% is really a HUD product, and again, it's kind of there are risk and benefits to HUD. 98% is a really good level of loan to value, but it's a 30-year product. And while it's cheaper, it's also longer to close. So it could take an 18-month process to just to get to closing. There are typically a lot of fees associated with that, and the complexities of a HUD deal in terms of getting it to close and the things that you have to do throughout the life of it is much different than a bank transaction. The bank transaction is going to be a little less restrictive, but it's not going to be as high as in proceeds as you can get with a HUD transaction. And some of that too is deal by deal specific. So on a 98% of value, it may be not the value that's restrictive, but the debt service that's restrictive. So if you're looking at a limited equity cooperative structure that may or may not have a HAP contract on it, and I'll get into that a little bit later. It could end up being that what's the more restrictive is not the percentage of proceeds relative to value, but is the level of proceeds relative to debt service. In which case, it may not make much of a difference between a HUD transaction or a bank transaction in terms of proceeds. And then you're really looking about the difference between, what type of, how fast do you need to close? Can we live with these requirements through HUD, or would we rather have lesser requirements with a bank? So that's really where the art versus the science comes in. And so good question, and I'll talk a little bit more on that in capital stacks.
Appreciate that, Jarrell. And just wanted to say, if you could, after your presentation, maybe come in and answer some of these other questions in the chat. Appreciate everybody for asking questions and staying engaged.
All right, perfect. So let's go to the next deck. Next slide. So when I say capital stack, what do I mean? Capital stack is basically just a term to say this is how a project is financed. It's typically a combination of debt and a combination of debt and equity. Next slide. So this one talks about, sorry about this. So the types of equity is really, from either cash from owner, cash from investors, grant dollars. If you're an existing cooperative, this could mean reserves, right? As a new cooperative, you're looking to finance this. Grant dollars would be a potential source of revenue for equity. And for debt, we're looking at bank loans. We're looking at potential HUD debt on this. You can look at agency. You can look at soft. Now on HUD, I have the 213 and the 221D4. There are also other products that allow you to basically refinance an existing loan. So say if you didn't want to wait for one of the downsides to HUD is that it takes a long time to close. But if you want a quicker transaction, you could do a loan from a bank, then have that refinanced through HUD. Again, the fees on that is going to be you're going to pay for the fees. But if it's something that if it's a timing issue and you really like HUD as your long-term debt provider, there's a way to do that, and it has to make sense for the size and scope of the transaction. It's not going to make sense for every deal, but for a universe of deals, that may make sense. Soft debt is essentially debt that is not must pay. So you'll see housing and so forth. This is really a limited equity cooperative discussion at this point. So if you're looking to do say it's a TOPA transaction where you're looking to convert an existing multifamily, keep it affordable in a co-op type structure. In order to make the end loan work, you're going to have a little bit more friendly equity in your capital stack. So that may mean grant dollars that doesn't have to be repaid. That may mean soft debt, which again also doesn't have to be repaid. That's repaid if you have excess cash flow available to repay the debt, but it's not what's called must pay. A bank is must pay. If you don't pay it, then you're in default. With the soft debt, if you don't pay it, it can accumulate, but you're not really in a default situation where the soft debt provider will foreclose on the property and take the property and do all and go through that process. Soft debt is usually provided by housing authorities and things in agencies like that. Next slide. So on the construction debt, typically there's a market rate deal and you're a developer. We're looking for some type of sponsor to guarantee, either principal and payment guarantees or completion guarantees. This is a sort of a TOPA conversion, and you have the co-op already in place. You have tenant shareholders already in. It's cash flowing. It has a certain amount of cash flow. That may not require a sponsor at that point because the building can support it. Can support the must pay debt. But usually you'll see, especially if it's in if it's an affordable deal, in other words, a limited equity deal, there's usually some component of housing authority money in there, whether that's either as a form of a grant or a soft debt. in a typical construction, like you say, if it's a ground up construction deal, there's going to be some level of pre-solds. There's going to be a construction vehicle that operates kind of more like a line of credit than a permanent term loan, like the loans we were discussing before. That debt gets paid down as you start selling more co-op units. So as people buy in, say it's a market rate deal and you're selling these things at $280,000 or $300,000, not necessarily a sort of an affordable deal, but market rate. Those proceeds from the sale can be used to pay down the construction debt, and so that's typically how that will work. Usually there will be some level of blanket loan or mortgage at the end that will be transferred over to the cooperative that will be must pay debt over time. So next slide, please. So this goes into the capital stacks, and I told you this is going to look very familiar. And while the color schemes might be different, don't let it fool you. It's the same size. So single family, typical, 80% debt, 20% equity. Next slide, please. And a condo model, what you'll see is you have a building where you have debt on the bottom, which is the representative of the orange. The blues represent the equity. And in this case, each individual unit has its own debt and equity. Next slide, please. Well, this is the cooperative model. So let's say at the end of the construction deal, say it costs, you had a $10 million construction loan, you sold you sold the shares in the cooperative to different tenant shareholders, and at the end of all that, at the end of the sales and at the end of construction completion, and you're now in ownership and it's now cooperative, there may be $3 million left. So that $3 million is the blanket loan, is the mortgage that remains owned by the cooperative. And then the share debt is essentially the debt that, and I talked about this briefly, and again, this isn't going to be a shareholder loan discussion, but each shareholder, we do provide this service. They can come to a bank like us and ask for financing for their unit. And so if it's a $300,000 share price, maybe we can finance $100,000, $200,000 of that. And so you'll have, a piece of equity, a piece that's the share debt, and then the piece that is for the cooperative. And that's what this represents. Next slide, please. And this one here is basically showing no share debt. So you started with a $10 million construction loan. You're able to sell all the share loans and all the units. And at the end of the day, you pay down the entire construction loan, and all that's left are the share debt, is the share debt, and then the equity per unit. Next slide. And this is the HUD financing, which you saw before. So in this case, you're using the 213. So you're using a HUD debt to basically do the entire build out. HUD remains as your sole source of debt on the loan, on the building, and then that's extended for an additional 30 years. So the entire project is essentially financed through debt. Next slide. And this one here refers to, again, this is the sort of the blanket loan at 30%. Then you have some untapped equity and sort of restricted equity, which is more of a limited equity model. Next deck. And this here shows basically your mixed income model. And I know I only have a few minutes, but I just want to touch a little bit more about what can, in a limited equity cooperative, what that might look like. So in a limited equity, say you have, same situation, $10 million project, you're selling these things at say $300,000 a unit or whatever. Then you may have some units that are limited equity, And so you're not selling them for 300,000 units per unit. You may be selling them for 25,000 or 10,000. And the way the math can work on that is if you have a partial HAB contract on the property. So if you have a project-based voucher that allows you to get close to market rent on the property, on the units, that will allow the sort of the operating math to work, where you're getting a combination of, you know, market rate coming in to subsidize basically some of the limited equity units. And collectively, you're still getting the cash flow that you need in order to support and operate the building. We finance a ton of those, either full project-based voucher, limited equity cooperatives, or partial project-based voucher limited equity cooperatives, where it's sort of more of a mixed income type of project. So that's one of the ways that you can make the math work on these types of deals. Next slide, please. So larger Q&A, next slide. This is my contact information. So feel free to, if there are any project-based or any deal-specific questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I'll take any questions now that we have time to get to. And if I can't get to your question, please feel free to reach out.
I appreciate you being on here today, Jarrell. That's a lot of information to throw at people in a short period of time.
I know, and I apologize. I'm sorry, but as you can tell, there's a lot to this, and it really is an art versus a science. But you know, as it relates to specific deals, that's why it's important just to reach out to someone who can walk you through all your options.
Well, hopefully we'll get some questions to you for people who specifically are looking at starting up housing co-op. So thanks again. We appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Last but not least today, Jake Syke with the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority. Did I say that right? Yeah. Where do you want him to stand?
Wherever you'd like to, if you want to stand up front.
Let me trade mics with you.
See if you need it. All right. Well, it's nice to see everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I know I stand between you and a nice weekend, so I'll try to go through this pretty quickly here. And I think this is a fun presentation. So I'm going to show you a lot of pictures. I'm going to take you on a site visits, as you could say that. So just real quick, the next one. Just real quick about who IHCDA is and our mission, if you want to go to the next slide there. So we provide housing opportunities, promote self-sufficiency, and strengthen our communities. Those are the three pillars that we focus on. IHCDA is a quasi-agency. Everything from homelessness to home ownership is somewhere within this agency. And we also have in community development, we promote placemaking. So that's the next one. One thing I want to share with you is you've had a lot of information today. There's obviously a lot of data, housing data, and all of you know that there's needs across our state for more affordable housing, more just market rate housing, preserving our existing affordable housing. All of that's out there. And we know that there's challenges. About a year and a half ago, IHCDA launched what's called the Indiana Housing Dashboard. And it centralized a lot of our housing data for you to have. And it's broken down into population, housing stocks, housing affordability, and jobs. If you want to go to the next slide real quick. And you can go to indianahousingdashboard.com and you can start to look at some of this data at the state level, and you can look at it at the county level, and you can compare your counties. And while this is nice, there were still some areas where we knew we needed to make some improvements. So by June of this year, there's going to be a much more robust version, 2.0 version of this. And it's actually going to provide you with some additional housing data. It's also going to break it down into the census tract data. It's going to allow you to compare one community in the state versus another community. It's going to walk you through the process of how to engage your community in developing a housing strategic plan. It's going to do that for you. It's going to walk you through that. It's going to allow you the opportunity to use this data to set your local housing priorities that you would like to take on, and that you could measure and follow over the next year or 2 or 3 years to see how you are influencing this housing data. In addition to that, there will be a library of resources that you can look to explore to undertake your developments and how you want to take on, whether it be home ownership or preserving your existing housing stock or creating new rental housing. All those resources are going to be there for you. You can, right now, currently, if you click on Export Full Report, you can generate a housing needs assessment for your county with the state of Indiana within a matter of just a few seconds. And it doesn't cost you a dime. Now, if you were to do this and hire a consultant, it's going to cost you probably about $20,000. But in Indiana, you can do it for free, and you can do it in a few seconds. So if you go to the next slide, these are just some of the takeaways that I had when I was looking at the state's housing needs assessment. 45% of our population is over 65, and they're living with a disability. Okay? 73% of our homes are single family. 45% of our homes were built before 1970. We have an aging housing stock across our state. The median listing price has increased by 15% since 2010. Now that data right there, that data point doesn't include the pandemic. So we all know that the housing costs have increased. I can tell you it's more than 15% because we didn't have the current data to give you that. Home ownership demographics. When we talked about the population, 69% home ownership rate across our state. We're pretty proud of that. But when you drill a little bit deeper, we all know there is disparities among Black households, which is at 37%. And we know that we have 74% among non-Hispanic whites. So there's a huge disparity there. We know we can do better in this area. And we have 54% Hispanic and Latino households are homeowners. Our median rent, this doesn't include the pandemic percentage. This is 21% since 2010. So we know that rents have gone up. We've heard that quite a bit today. But that was prior to the pandemic. Cost burden, 40% of households are housing cost burden, and 61% of households are cost burden below 50, making annual of $50,000. We have a rental gap of about 400,000 people across our state. And that's focused on those who make less than $50,000 annually, or renting below $1,200 a month. So you can take pictures, but actually I encourage you to go to indianahousingdashboard.com, pull your own report for the state, for your county, and then go back in June, before June. And what's going to be nice is you're going to be empowered to develop housing strategies for your organization, for your community, and to also be empowered to make change happen. So that's what the Indiana Housing Dashboard is all about. So, well, let's go on to the next slide here. Let's jump in. I'm going to take you on site visits. Let's go around the state. I was asked to help you understand the opportunities to link housing into other areas of our communities. Every community in our state has some type of challenge, not just housing, but something else. Transportation, healthcare, education, career development, small business, supporting entrepreneurs. All of those things, every one of our communities has some type of challenge. I'm going to show you